Now, it's the stuff of nightmares, being stuck deep underground and unable to get out. That's been the situation for 7 men who've been trapped in a flooded cave in Laos for over a week following torrential rain. It's claimed they became stranded while looking for gold. On Wednesday, divers found 5 of the men huddled together on a ledge deep in the cave. The rescuers shared this footage of them, and understandably they look relieved and are apparently unhurt. They were discovered around 300 metres from the cave's entrance, but the operation to get them out is only just beginning. In a moment, we'll talk to a scientific cave diver who can give us an idea of what this dangerous operation will look like. He'll also remind us of another dramatic rescue that happened back in 2018 when a number of boys from a football team became trapped in a cave in Thailand. But first, let's look at the exact location of where this Laos cave is. It's part of an extensive underground network in the Long Cheng district of Xaisomboun province. Now, that's about 120 kilometres north of the capital, Vientiane. It's a mountainous terrain, and because of heavy rains, the rescue operation is extremely difficult. Well, joining us now is Julian Lewis from Brisbane, Australia. He's a professor in paleontology at Griffith University. Now, that means he's a scientist who studies fossils, and because of that, he's also an expert cave diver. Perhaps you can just explain then exactly what you do as a scientific cave diver.
Sure, thanks, Alex. So as a scientific cave diver, we try to use cave diving techniques to address questions that can only be found in underwater cave systems. So my particular speciality, paleontology, I look at fossils, and I look at fossils that are deposited in wet submerged caves. And the reason why we target these sorts of fossils and these sorts of systems is because the preservation potential is exceptional. Fossils recovered from underwater caves are some of the best preserved fossils that we find anywhere in the world, and that's because they've lain undisturbed for hundreds of thousands of years. And the reason they've laid undisturbed is because there's very few organisms and very few people that can actually get to these underwater flooded deposits.
Yeah, I imagine that they are very dangerous, of course, especially in bad weather. Just paint a picture of what they're like.
So these caves are in the tropics, and tropical caves are very dynamic sorts of systems. There's monsoonal activity that happens on a regular basis. There's a huge amount of mud flows, mass movement flows of sediments through passages, which can block passages that might otherwise be open at other times. And you also get a lot of water coming through these systems in a very short amount of time. So when you have these massive rain events, the water doesn't move slowly as it does through much more consolidated sort of sediments. It moves very quickly through these open passages. And so you can get passages that were dry, and they can become flooded and even flooded up to the roof in the matter of minutes to hours.
Yeah, and that's very frightening. Look, we've got some pictures of some of the rescue operation in Laos from over the last few days, which we can show now. The conditions look pretty awful, waterlogged, incredibly cramped. What I really want to know is how divers can navigate these dangerous cave systems when there's often zero visibility, and it looks pretty claustrophobic, certainly to me. And of course, some are wearing and using these oxygen tanks, which they've also got to get through these very, very narrow panels. And I mean, basically, there is no room at all to move. They often have to take them off. So just give us an idea of what that's like.
Well, first of all, the divers that are doing this diving are highly trained individuals, and they've been practicing these sorts of techniques and been working with these sorts of techniques, oftentimes for many years, if not decades. The key thing to remember is that when you're first moving through these systems in an underwater setting, you're going to be wanting to take a guideline with you. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a continuous line between the surface and wherever you are. And that's because, as you said, visibility in these systems is going to be non-existent. So you're going to be doing everything by feel. And so by making sure that you have that guideline all the way through, not only can you make your way back, but anybody following behind you will be able to follow that guideline as well and make sure that they don't get lost and make sure that they can move through the same passages that you have. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to do. Once that guideline is established, then it becomes a small amount easier to move through these systems, because now you have a line that you know to follow. And generally speaking, you will want to mark that line as well with exit markers. So in other words, you'll have arrows put on those lines that indicate to you where the exit direction is. And so that if you do lose contact with that line, you just need to find it again. And if you find it again, then you'll always know the way out. And the reason why it's important to know the way out is because, unlike diving in open water systems, where if you run into any sorts of troubles, you can go back up to the surface, in these cave systems, you cannot go back up to the surface. You have to go all the way back the way that you came. And so that's one reason why these cave divers would be having all sorts of redundancy systems in terms of the equipment that they carry, to make sure that if one piece of equipment does go wrong, then they've got another piece of equipment that's there for them, ready to go, so that they can make their way out and complete these dives successfully and safely.
I mean, it really does make me feel extremely claustrophobic. You have to be brave to be able to do this. Some of the trapped men, as I said before, have been found alive, and obviously that's absolutely great news. We've got some footage that we can show that was posted by rescuers, and in fact, in this footage, we can hear some of the men crying. Very moving, I guess. They probably weren't expecting or wondering if they would ever be found, and then they were found. But just how difficult will it be to get them out of this, given just how far away they are from the entrance and all those limitations that you were just talking about?
I mean, the difficulty can't be overstated. These individuals obviously have probably got no sorts of cave diving experience, and so they're going to have to be taken physically by a diver through what are sometimes incredibly narrow passages. So if the passages are large, then at least the diver can be alongside or on top of that individual and help them, guide them through. But when you're talking about these incredibly narrow passages, which can only fit one person at best, these individuals are going to have to, have their wits about them, and they're going to have to push them through. So with the cave diving rescue attempt, the way that they got around that was to actually sedate those children and to be able to bring them back safely so that they wouldn't freak out under the water. I'm not sure what they're going to do with this particular instance. I mean, the individuals that have been trapped in these caves obviously have experience, like working in caves. If they're gold diggers or gold explorers, as you suggested they might be, then they've obviously been in these sorts of systems before. So they may have a little bit of experience to fall back on. But the main thing is that they do not panic underwater. Panic is probably the #1 killer as far as cave diving is concerned. And provided that they don't freak out and provided that they follow the instructions of the cave divers, then there's some hope that they'll be able to get out successfully and alive.
And what about the possibility of actually pumping out the water?
It really depends on the cave system that we're talking about. So each cave system is going to be unique. But one of the things that's probably happening at the moment is you're getting large rain events, which means that there's a huge volume of water running through these systems. Pumping the water out may work for small restricted chambers, so chambers that don't receive a lot of water flow from these mass rain events. But if the rain events if these cavers are stuck in a chamber where there is that active water flow, then no amount of pumping is going to be able to remove that water. There'll always be some water in that particular system that they will have to dive through to get out. The other possibility is that they wait for the rain to stop and wait for those water levels to naturally drop down. Now, if they can do that, they'll need to make sure that they're in a chamber where they have sufficient oxygen to be able to breathe for 5 individuals. And they'll obviously need to be resupplied from the surface by the cave divers in terms of food, fresh water, and making sure that there's no infections and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think the 5 who have been found were talking about being absolutely starving, even though they were physically seemed to be okay. And I guess that must be a big issue of trying to get food and, as you say, clean water to them. You also just mentioned before what happened in 2018, which was in Thailand, because some of the divers who've been helping out with this particular situation were involved in that rescue. Just to remind people, it was in northern Thailand. Thailand in 2018. 12 schoolboys and their football coach got trapped in a cave. They went in there, I think, to celebrate one of the boys' birthdays, and they were eventually rescued after more than 2 weeks underground. So my main question is, what lessons were learned from that rescue that can perhaps be used to help the people who are trapped in this particular situation in Laos?
Yeah, I think the main lesson that was learned has already been applied, and that was to bring in the expert cave divers as early as possible. I mean, cave diving is an incredibly specialized sub-branch of diving, and really requires its own special technical training, mindset, and equipment. And so bringing in the cave divers early with this particular Laotian situation has meant that the experts are on the ground and they're there to be able to evaluate and properly access these individuals. And then, obviously, in terms of extraction, as I mentioned, with the Thai cave rescue, these boys had to be sedated. So whether the cave divers will choose to use that particular technique with these individuals, or whether they will try to get them out with these individual Laotian villagers conscious, I'm not really sure. I think that's a decision that needs to be made on the ground, and that'll very much depend on those particular conditions of that cave. So 300 meters into a cave is quite a deep penetration into a cave, especially if most of the chambers are flooded. If only a few of the chambers are flooded, or if only a few of the passages are flooded, then that might change the dynamic. That might change the equation one way or the other.
I mean, I guess my final question really is, given how dangerous caves can be, why do people enter them at all? In this situation, we are told that perhaps these men were looking for gold. You obviously are doing it from a professional point of view, but it does seem an extremely dangerous pastime to be involved in at all.
Yeah, it is dangerous, but if it's done with the correct safety measures in place, in controlled settings, with the right training, and with the right preparation, then obviously you can mitigate a lot of those risks. And when we do scientific cave diving, that's one of the things that we obviously try to do. Recreational cave divers have the same mentality, so they'll always try to mitigate all the risks, make sure that they have the proper training, and generally you're trying to dive in much easier conditions. So the waters that we tend to dive in are preferably clearer, they're preferably stiller, and we are diving with a purpose. My experience working with individuals in Southeast Asia is that they'll enter these caves for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they'll just enter like we do in terms of show caves and recreational caves, just because they're curious, just because they're interested. Other times there's things that they can harvest within the cave, so things like sparrows' nests, and bats, for example. And in this particular instance, as you suggested, perhaps they were looking for gold. In my experience, caves are not great locations for gold, but all it takes is one rumor that somebody found some gold deposits in one particular cave systems, and obviously that becomes quite attractive for villagers who are probably earning, maybe a few dollars a week. So you can't blame them for going into these caves. And obviously, even caves that you're very familiar with can change in the space of, as I said, a few hours when you have these massive rain events.
Julian Lewis from Griffith University in Australia, thanks so much for your insights and thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, Alex. No problems.
Well, GW News will keep you up to date across all our platforms on this dramatic rescue operation. But many thanks for your company with me. I'm Alex Forrest Whiting. I'll see you next time.